All right, so let's dive into these sheriff eviction notices.
Yeah.
We've all heard the term,
Mm-hmm.
but what does it actually mean, when a sheriff gets involved in an eviction?
Well, what's interesting is that it doesn't always happen at the very end.
Right.
You might think it's only about, someone being forced out.
Yeah, that dramatic moment.
Exactly. But the sheriff can actually play a role much earlier.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
We were looking at the Riverside County Sheriff's website, and they talk about the writ of possession.
Right.
And that's the court order that gives them the power to actually remove a tenant.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens before it gets to that?
Well, think of it like the sheriff can be involved right from the beginning.
Okay.
They can be the one to personally serve the summons and complaint.
Right.
Those initial legal documents that kick off the whole eviction process.
So that's what it means when you hear about someone being served by the sheriff. Okay. But the article we have here also mentioned using registered process servers.
Right.
Is that just like another option, or the reason why landlords might prefer to go that route?
It often comes down to efficiency.
Okay.
And, knowing the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
Process servers specialize in this, so they're usually much quicker and more adept at getting those papers served correctly.
Okay.
And that can save landlords a lot of hassle down the line.
Makes sense.
Yeah, which is probably why it's the preferred method.
Yeah, the time is of the essence.
Absolutely.
In these situations. Now there's this form called prejudgment claim of right to possession.
Right.
And that really kind of caught my eye.
Yeah.
That seems like a crucial step for landlords.
It really is. Imagine you go through this whole court process.
Right.
You get the order to evict.
Yeah.
And then, bam, the sheriff finds out there are other people living there who weren't even part of the case.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this form is designed to prevent that kind of nightmare scenario.
So it's like a safety net for the landlord almost.
Exactly.
Forcing any hidden occupants out in the open.
It requires any unknown occupants to identify themselves up front.
Okay.
And if they don't, they can still be included in the eviction judgment.
Interesting.
Even if the landlord wasn't initially aware of them.
Okay.
So this helps ensure that everyone living at the property is bound by the court's decision.
Right.
So it prevents those nasty surprises
Right.
during the actual eviction.
That's a huge point for landlords to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Avoiding those kinds of delays is really crucial.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about what happens after a judgment is issued.
Sure.
That's when things get really serious, right?
Absolutely. After the court rules in favor of the landlord, the writ of possession comes into play.
Right.
And this document is essentially the green light
Okay.
for the sheriff to take action
Right.
and remove the tenant.
And then comes that 5-day notice period.
Right.
It feels like the final countdown, right?
It certainly does. The sheriff will post a notice giving the tenant 5 days to vacate the property voluntarily.
Okay.
Now, this is where it gets a bit more complex.
I'm all ears. What happens if they don't leave within that 5-day window?
If the tenant doesn't leave, the sheriff is legally authorized to use reasonable force to remove them.
That phrase always jumps out at me. Reasonable force.
Right.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's not a free-for-all.
Right.
There are definitely legal boundaries and procedures they have to follow.
Okay.
But this is a point where having an experienced lawyer by your side can be invaluable.
Sure.
They can help you navigate the complexities of interacting with the sheriff's department and ensure everything is handled legally and respectfully.
So knowing your rights and having that legal guidance can make a world of difference in this situation.
Absolutely. Whether you're a landlord or a tenant, understanding the nuances of the law can empower you to protect your interests.
It feels like a bit of a minefield, this whole process,
You're not wrong.
with potential pitfalls at every turn.
But don't worry, we'll unpack all of this in more detail after a quick break. It's easy to get caught up in all the legal back and forth.
Right.
But we can't forget about the human element.
Right.
I mean, evictions are incredibly stressful for everyone involved.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for the tenant.
Yeah.
We're talking about potentially losing their home.
Right.
That feeling of instability must be just overwhelming.
And it goes beyond just the physical space, too.
Yeah.
It's about security routine, that sense of belonging.
Right.
Being uprooted. That can disrupt your entire life from your job to your kid's school.
Yeah, I imagine it's a lot of pressure for landlords as well.
Oh, absolutely.
They're trying to protect their investment, dealing with lost income,
Mm-hmm.
often facing these difficult conversations with tenants who might be going through a tough time?
It's definitely a multifaceted situation.
Right.
Landlords have a right to protect their property and their income,
Yep.
but approaching the situation with empathy and understanding is crucial.
That makes me think about when we were talking about reasonable force.
Right.
Like, what does that actually entail in these situations?
Yeah.
What are the limitations?
Well, the sheriff's deputies are trained to de-escalate the situation whenever possible.
Go.
Their goal is to carry out the eviction peacefully and safely. They'll typically start by requesting the tenant to leave voluntarily.
Okay.
And if the tenant refuses, the deputies might use minimal force,
Right.
like guiding them out of the property.
So it's not automatically like breaking down the door and,
Right.
and forcibly dragging people out.
Not at all.
Right.
In fact, there are strict guidelines in place to prevent excessive force.
Right.
The deputies are required to document everything and use body cameras to ensure accountability.
Okay, that's good. I was picturing something a little more Hollywood-esque, I guess.
It's understandable to have those images in mind,
Right.
but the reality is usually much less dramatic. Now, there are situations where a tenant might resist more forcefully.
Right.
And in those cases, the deputies might need to use additional restraint techniques.
Yeah.
But again, the emphasis is always on de-escalation and safety for everyone involved.
It sounds like having a lawyer present during this phase could be really helpful for both landlords and tenants.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Having legal representation can ensure that everyone's rights are respected throughout the process.
Okay.
For landlords, a lawyer can advise them on the proper procedures and make sure the eviction is carried out lawfully.
Right.
For tenants, a lawyer can advocate for their rights and potentially negotiate a more favorable outcome, like extra time to move out or assistance with relocation.
So it's not just about, winning or losing.
Right.
It's about ensuring a fair and just process for everyone.
Exactly. It's about protecting people's rights and navigating a complex legal situation with the guidance of someone who understands the intricacies.
We talked earlier about the prejudgment claim of right to possession form being this crucial safeguard for landlords.
Right.
But does it offer any protection for tenants as well?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the answer is surprisingly yes.
Okay.
By ensuring all occupants are identified early on, it prevents a situation where someone might be completely blindsided by an eviction notice they never saw coming.
Okay.
And it gives them a chance to participate in the legal process and understand their rights.
So even though it's primarily a tool for landlords,
Right.
it can indirectly contribute to a fairer process
Exactly.
for everyone.
It promotes transparency and open communication, which are vital in these emotionally charged situations.
Okay, so we've talked about the emotional toll, the potential for reasonable force,
Right.
the importance of legal representation during that post-judgment phase.
Yeah.
But what are some practical steps someone facing eviction can take to protect themselves?
First and foremost, don't ignore any legal notices you receive. It's crucial to understand what's being asked of you and the deadlines involved.
Okay.
Many tenants make the mistake of burying their heads in the sand, hoping the problem will just go away.
Yeah, it's a natural human reaction, I think,
Yeah.
to avoid something scary.
Right.
But I guess that just makes things worse in the long run.
Absolutely. Ignoring the problem won't make it disappear, and it could actually limit your options down the line.
So what's the best course of action if you receive an eviction notice?
If you find yourself in this situation, the most important thing you can do is seek legal advice immediately.
I bet a lot of people hesitate to do that,
Yeah.
assuming it'll be expensive or that they can handle it themselves.
I understand that concern.
Right.
But remember, this is your home we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's worth investing in legal expertise to understand your rights and explore all available options.
Right. So seeking legal advice is crucial.
Right.
But what can a lawyer actually do to help in these situations?
Well, think of it this way. A lawyer specializing in evictions is like a seasoned guide.
Through a complicated maze.
Right.
They know the ins and outs of the law, the potential pitfalls,
Yeah.
and the strategies that can work in your favor.
So they can help you navigate those twists and turns
Yeah,
to
exactly.
avoid any dead ends.
Precisely.
Okay.
For example, they can scrutinize the eviction notice itself, looking for any technical errors or procedural missteps
Okay.
that could potentially invalidate the entire process.
So it's not always a slam dunk
Right.
for the landlord.
Not necessarily.
There might be loopholes or legal grounds to challenge the eviction.
Absolutely. And a lawyer can help you identify and leverage those opportunities.
Okay.
They can also negotiate with the landlord or their attorney,
Right.
potentially reaching a settlement that avoids a court hearing altogether.
That sounds like a much less stressful route.
It definitely can be.
If possible.
And even if a court hearing is unavoidable,
Yeah.
a lawyer can be your advocate, presenting your case, cross-examining witnesses, and ensuring your side of the story is heard. It's reassuring to know you have somebody in your corner fighting for you,
Right.
especially when the stakes are so high.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field and ensuring a fair and just outcome.
So we've talked about the sheriff's role, the emotional impact, the importance of seeking legal counsel. Are there any common misconceptions people have about evictions that we should address?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that once you receive an eviction notice, you're automatically out on the street.
Right.
That's simply not true. You have rights,
Okay.
and the legal process must be followed.
So don't panic.
Right.
Assume the worst case scenario right away.
Exactly. Take a deep breath, seek legal advice, and understand your options.
Okay.
Another misconception is that tenants have no power in these situations.
Okay.
While it's true that landlords initiate the process,
Right.
tenants still have legal protections.
So it's not just a one-sided power dynamic?
Not at all. A good lawyer can help tenants assert their rights
Yeah.
and potentially even turn the tables in some cases. For example, if a landlord hasn't followed proper procedures or is retaliating against a tenant for legitimate complaints, the eviction might be deemed unlawful.
That makes sense. So knowledge really is power in these situations.
Absolutely. Understanding the law and your rights can make a world of difference in how you approach an eviction, both as a landlord and a tenant.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the initial notice to the potential involvement of the sheriff, it's clear that evictions are complex,
Right.
emotionally charged, and potentially life-altering events.
They certainly are. And while we've focused on the legal aspects, it's important to remember the human impact at the heart of it all.
Exactly. Homes, families, livelihoods.
Right.
There's a lot at stake.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's so crucial to approach these situations with a blend of knowledge, empathy, and a commitment to fairness.
Very well said.
So to wrap up this deep dive, if there's one key takeaway for our listener, what would it be?
If you're facing a potential eviction, don't hesitate to reach out for help. Seek legal counsel, understand your rights, and remember that you're not alone in this.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you found this information helpful, and remember, knowledge is your best defense in navigating this complex world of evictions.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.